and welcome to another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. I'm Ari Rosenbaum. Dan Venturi is here. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing well, sir. How are you?
Let's talk about we'll mention this week's topic, and then we'll probably talk about Los Angeles because we're recording this a week after. We're recording this before Tampa Bay, so if you're listening to it now, Tampa Bay event, St. Pete event already has happened. But anyway, our topic for this week is a 401k plan sponsor, a class action lawsuit is the least of their worries, so we'll talk about all the threats and liability concerns that a plan sponsor would have. Forget about the class action lawsuits because those really only deal with the larger plans, but we'll talk about that. But Dan, your thoughts first about Los Angeles.
Hey, I really love LA. I love the West Coast, man. I fell in love. Outside of the cross-border pollution issue, which I'm not too sure many folks know about this, but apparently the Mexicans are dumping all sorts of shit, literally, not figuratively, literally human feces into the Tijuana River, which in turn ends up backing up into the Pacific. So Ari's conference was at Dodger Stadium, and I had stayed in San Diego, and sure enough, the place where I was staying at, the freaking beach was closed because the Mexicans decided to pollute the Pacific. So, my luck, I go out to California and the Pacific's closed. That said, the event was awesome, man. Steve Garvey is a really cool dude, really down to earth, had some awesome stories. I'll let Ari talk about our special guest who came by and added a little life to the conference as well. The speakers were great. I think the attendees got what they had expected, probably more. And we got a great tour of Dodger Stadium, right? So I was driving back, and I'm laughing because I keep seeing Ari talk about trying to beat the LA traffic, which neither of us did.
Yeah.
And we're in. My wife and I had rented a convertible for the trip because we're out in LA, right? That's one of the things you should do. So I'm out there, and she's driving, and I'm in the passenger seat with the top down and the sun on my face, and it was a good day. So all in all, it was a great conference. It was a great event, Ari. Thank you for putting it on. I'm sure we'll be back out in LA at some point for those guys out there that missed it. Tampa, right? By the time you guys hear that, Tampa will have been a great event as well. We're on Atlanta after that, and that's going to be Masters weekend, and there's a Atlanta Met game involved as well in that package. So I would act quickly, go to the website, and let's see you guys come out down in Atlanta.
Yeah, Los Angeles was a lot of fun. I'm a big fan of LA. I always have. That's always been the place I probably wanted to live. But life throws you a curve. I do still a member of the California bar. But the drive, I kept on rushing. I gotta go. I gotta beat the traffic. And of course, I don't beat the traffic. It's like 2:30, and it's like to get there. I was in Anaheim at Disneyland with my family, so I left at like 5:30, and I think I was at Dodger Stadium at 6, and I really wasn't really supposed to be there until 8. And then that same drive back was like an hour and 20 minutes. New York, if you leave before 3, you should be okay, or even before 4. I mean, that was some bad traffic. It was really something else. The event itself was really great. Steve Garvey, who I'd met before, fantastic guest. In terms of the special guest, that was not a special guest. That person is a friend of mine. As Gene Okerlund would say, a longtime close personal friend. Lisa Ann was at the event. She's on Sirius XM. She's also known, of course, as an adult star of some sorts or whatever. But she's a friend of mine, so she was at the event. And the funniest part was, she says, "Oh, can a friend of mine come?" I'm like, "Okay, whatever. Lisa's a friend of mine, and that's fine." And I didn't know that the friend is like a videographer, photographer, and so they were shooting video. And if you go to YouTube and type in Lisa Ann 401k conference, you'll see the conference. I mean, Steve Garvey talking. I make an appearance. Dan's wife makes an appearance in the video. You'll see me wearing my Dodgers jersey by the dugout. Your wife, I think, during the stadium tour, we
Yep.
see her. So it's kind of funny to see that is online, and it's a great thing to see how much fun these events are. Yeah, you learn a thing or two, but it's kind of memorable. You're meeting Steve Garvey really up close and personal, and it was a really fun event. The tour was great. I think that anytime that we do a tour of a stadium with a lot of history, it's really going to stand out. I think this is just kind of like Wrigley in my mind. Citizens Bank was a great tour because we got to go in the clubhouse, and Wrigley and Dodger Stadium didn't allow that. But walking on the field, Dodger Stadium, getting in the dugout, it was a lot of fun. Vince Scully's press area, which is named after him. It was a lot of fun, and again, I recommend anybody to attend these events. That 41ksite.com to sign up. We got St. Pete, of course. By the time you're listening to this, it's over. Atlanta's up, and by the time you're listening to this, hopefully KC will be up to sign up for that. And we're working on other events. Cleveland, I got to look into that for September, and then October. I got some cities thrown around. Something probably maybe we might go back to the metropolitan New York area. November's booked with Foxborough at Gillette Stadium, home of the Patriots. And I think December we're probably going to do Dallas, AT&T Stadium, home of the Cowboys. We're going to try to throw in some football stadiums. It gives us some variety. As far as LA, yeah, I think we did Dodger Stadium. It's possibly next year we might want to do Anaheim, especially now that I saw on Entertainment Weekly, the magazine this week, they have the Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, which is opening up very, very soon at Disneyland.
Oh.
So that might be a reason to go back there in next February. We'll see what happens. Or later in the year, we'll see what happens. Again, it's based on interest and obviously based on sponsorship opportunities. So anyway, let's get back to this week. 401k plan sponsors. Class action. It's really not in the cards usually for the small, medium-sized plans, but there's a whole host of other problems along the way that are just as dangerous for the plan fiduciary. When I started on LinkedIn for my law firm, I met James Holland, who's from Millennium Retirement, grade 338 in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we were discussing, on LinkedIn about, the threats for plan sponsors. And there was this guy, really nutty guy, who I don't know what he was doing for a living. I think he was working with brokers somehow. And he said that James and I were selling fear, that plan sponsors really aren't the subject of litigation. Most plan sponsors aren't because they're not large enough. And, of course, my defense was, you know what, it's the least of their concerns. Only the larger employers are really going to have that threat of the, giant class action lawsuit. But, we have seen smaller plans get sued, here and there. But, like I said, whole host of other problems. The reason that small, mid-sized plans aren't being sued is because, listen, ERISA litigators, they make their money on settlements, and you get a bigger settlement suing a company like Oracle or Fidelity or, a large university like NYU than you would with, somebody with $25 million worth of assets or somebody with $1 million worth of assets. But, again, these small cases, there have been some class actions, but not likely. However, in terms of threats and litigation, you can get sued, any plan sponsor, by a former employee. It's something I call the smash and grab. Many years ago, worked for a third-party administration firm. They were owned by two guys who happened to be Jewish. They were really difficult, especially one person in particular, very difficult people to work for. And I mentioned this at the LA conference. And we had an administrator over there who was Sabbath observant, or as Walter in The Big Lebowski would say, Shomer friggin' Shabbos. And the guy was Shomer Shabbos. He said, I can't work Saturdays, and that's fine. I'll work Sundays. And there was a time he went to Israel for a trip, claimed that he was working there on Sundays, but the fob key doesn't lie. So when you have to enter into a place and you gotta, put in a fob key and the door opens up, there's a record of that. And he lied about the hours and days that he was there. He was fired. Still didn't stop him from suing for religious discrimination. And listen, these are miserable people, one particular miserable people to work for. I don't believe for a second that they discriminated against anybody, especially somebody who was Jewish. But, guy got $4,000 out of it. That was the settlement because they thought, it's easier to settle than it is to litigate it. So they gave him $4,000 to walk away. So imagine you have dealing with former employees. And, I was an employee once too. I was a former employee once too. It could get a little dicey. So if you fire somebody for cause, you never know back. Never know when they're going to complain. And, they could use your 401k plan as a type of complaint and, sue you one-on-one and just do it just for the hell of getting a couple $1,000 back as part of some type of settlement. So, it's always possible that a participant, a former employee who will complain about anything, who probably might have been fired for cause, will still sit back and sue you over your 401k plan and just try to get, some kind of minimal settlement nuisance value and just walk away. So that's why I think it's important for 401k plan sponsors to have a plan that's in place and, tip-top shape. Dan, what do you think?
I agree. I mean, all it takes is to your point, one disgruntled employee to pick up the phone and not even, start a lawsuit because that takes effort, right? You have to be committed. You have to follow through with that. But it doesn't take a whole lot to pick up a phone and call the DOL and start saying stuff.
Right.
And that can create all sorts of headaches for you. Because, maybe what he's saying isn't remotely true, but when people start looking, maybe they'll find something else that is true. I've found over the years I've been doing this, you want to stay out of the bureaucracy and you want to stay out of the courts.
Yeah.
You don't want anything to do with those two. They entangle your business, and you never leave those engagements, without having to pay some sort of cost.
Right. Exactly. And, it happens. It really does happen. In terms of other challenges, this morning, in terms of fear, in terms of liability concerns, the IRS audit, that's a pretty big thing. Today I went to a school nearby my house, private school, who have an IRS audit that's been going on for now a year. They handled themselves, which, again, I've always said that's a mistake. But, there's some serious issues that the IRS agent has raised. And, right now I'm just at the bottom of it. I really don't know where we're going to go with that. Time will tell based on the information that the client's going to provide me. But heck, I've been through IRS audits where I think a lawsuit would have been a piece of cake compared to the audit. So many things can work out. You can have penalties. You can have plan disqualifications if you really screwed up royally on the plan. And, before you really even talk about the penalty phase, you have to understand that, qualified plans file a 5500 because they're required to do so. And those 5500s are the great way for the IRS to pick plan sponsors to audit. Some based on some of the answers that you give in the 5500 and some that are random. And, the reason for the audit process is to ensure that there's proper voluntary compliance. The audit looks at a specific year for this client in particular. They're looking at 2016. And not only they're looking at 2016, they may look at, like, for example, plan document issues. The agent is asking for the GUS plan document that was done back in, I don't remember when I think it was 2006 maybe when it finally was required, or it was at that might have been extra. I think that 2003. Listen, I've been in the business 20 years now. I think it might have ended in 2003. But anyway, they're asking for a GUS document that was prepared well before 2016. Plan sponsor doesn't have it, which I know now, about 15 minutes ago, I now know they do. that would have been a problem. Um, and I've seen so many situations with an IRS audit where they get penalized. One client penalized $40,000 for a mistake dealing with matching contributions. I've had clients back in the day, for those who know a little history about retirement plans prior to 2002. S corporation shareholders couldn't take out loans in 401k plans, and I had a plan on an audit where the S corporation shareholders did. For some agents, they might have disqualified the plan. The one that we're working on didn't. So, these are scary things. A plan that's in good compliance, that is, operating the plan according to the correct way, they're going to get a no change letter from the auditor. Some plans, won't get that no change letter. They might have some minor issues that will avert a penalty. Some will get a penalty. Some, in really, really bad shape, may get threat of plan disqualification. But, it's really important to understand that, class actions are not the fear. The bigger fear is a plan audit from the IRS. And then, of course, we'll talk about the DOL next. So, So what do you say? As a 316 administrator, TPA, you've dealt with quite a few plan audits.
There are landmines everywhere. All right. I mean, you hope that you keep your plans clean and you don't give yourself up, with a late contribution or something that has to be scheduled on the 5,500. You want to stay away from those telltale sort of data points that get you into trouble. But some of it is just random, right? I mean, no matter how clean the plan is, you might get a call. You might get a knock at the door. What I think by far the best practice is when you deal with an auditor, if you ever get these calls, aside from reaching out to an ERISA attorney, is to have a very large file, right? Just throw as much paper at these folks as you can. And I mean, I know everything's electronic now, but I think you get the point. I mean, make sure you have a file where everything is there. That's what we do. We have, a CRM system, and everything just goes in there.
Yeah, I mean, in this client in particular, again, you brought up a point that I bring up all the time. You get contacted by the IRS, and of course, we'll talk about next the DOL. Contact an ERISA attorney, whether it's me, somebody else, or even an ERISA attorney who works for your TPA. You got to get an attorney involved because, there are terms of art. There's terms of language when dealing with an agent. You can, and I talked about it this morning with this new client. They handle it themselves, and they handle it for 6 months now, and they were using terms of art that were incorrect. And I used the comparison to, I said the last time I was in Israel, my Hebrew is really rusty, and so I was talking to the security agent at the airport when I'm leaving, and it got to the point where my Hebrew was so bad they misunderstood me to believe that I was there for about 3 months without a extension of time to stay there, when I was really only there for about 10 days. So that's the same with plan sponsors. You may say things that you really don't mean, but the the auditor may assume that this is what you meant. So, like, for example, this is a client school. They have part-time teachers, aides. The aides are excluded by plan amendment. So it says no school aides will be eligible. However, the controller started talking about part-timers. Now, the IRS and the DOL don't like to mention that you're excluding part-timers. You can't exclude part-timers. But they were talking about part-timers. So, it could have cost them a whole lot, and it did cost them a lot of time in terms of exclusions because they're using terms that are just incorrect. And, Marge, who was the paralegal who kind of taught me everything when I first started out as an attorney, she said, when dealing with an IRS agent, they ask a question and you answer it directly. Do not volunteer any more information that is, that is asked. And plan sponsors, think that, they don't want to be an adversary. They think it could be a friendly process. It's not an adversarial process until, of course, they discover something. But these IRS agents aren't your friends. And if you bring an attorney, they're not going to stop being your friends. They never were your friends. I have a client who's a RIA, and they referred me in for a plan audit, and I think the client said, "Oh, we don't want this to be an adversarial process." Okay, this ain't no dance. This is not tea at somebody's house. This is a plan audit, and when things are discovered, the IRS agent is going to ask more and more questions. So contact an attorney, and that same goes with the DOL audit. DOL audit can be just as scary, if not more. You're dealing with, IRS is dealing with tax qualification. Department of Labor is dealing with participant rights. So again, there are issues in the 5500. The Department of Labor, late deferrals, that might be a trigger for the DOL to look into a plan. You say you don't have an ERISA bond. That's a good trigger for the DOL. DOLs are, DOL audits for me in experience have been a lot more painful. I find them to be more thorough because they're looking at more when dealing with participant rights. And I always use the example, I had a client who excluded a participant by name in their old DB plan, defined benefit plan. And the DOL demanded a benefit for these two employees, even though they weren't intended to get a benefit, and it was the agreement with the employees that they didn't get a benefit, but because it was an unreasonable exclusion by name, Department of Labor required the plan sponsor to put a benefit in. So, that's the problem. And of course, the DOL audit, I find to be a longer process. And I think time-consuming wise and cost-wise, it could be, it could be more painful. I didn't even get to take a look, but EPSA, I'll probably take a look and write an article about it, but EPSA just came out with their 2018 enforcement results.
Wow. That's all good.
Yeah, we got to look at that. But from a previous year, almost 70%, I don't know what's for 18, but 70% of DOL investigations resulted in some type of monetary result, which looks to be a fine, or some type of replenishment back to the plan. And the average was ranging in the tens of thousands of dollars in penalties and restoration of benefits. So, listen, sometimes you would rather get a lawsuit than a DOL audit, and I've been in situations where, that's been the case. So, I've been through a lot of DOL audits. I have one now that's been going on. It's like the Odyssey. It will not end. Dealing with late deferrals. I got a restaurant group with multiple locations and multiple late deferrals, and it's been going on now for a year.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah, February's been a year. Well, you're dealing with a lot of payrolls and getting the information, and it's been a very, very difficult process. So that's that. And then, of course, the last threat that we'll talk about this week, to me, is a really big threat, is really a lawsuit by the Department of Labor. Forget about just an audit. Department of Labor sees something that they don't like, and it's really, really bad. They may sue the plan sponsor and the plan fiduciaries individually. And you'll see that. Go to the EBSA's website, Department of Labor, Employee Benefit Security Administration. I used to look at it every week. I haven't done that in a while. This is a great place to look. Who gets sued? As Fletch would say in the movie Fletch, who's the scapegoat of the week? And you'll see, you'll see which plan sponsors were sued, who's going to jail. It's like the when I was at Stony Brook, I worked for this school paper, The Statesman. I used to do a police blotter. Every week I would go down to public safety's office, now it's the University Police, and go through the records and find some interesting stories. And EBSA, who's being brought in this week. And it's always fun to read. But it's fun to read as long as it's not you, as long as it's not somebody you know. And one time it was somebody I knew, a client of mine, and I've always talked about this. You had an old DB plan. Company went out of business. They were working with an actuary who, for 25 years, never bothered to do a valuation report. This guy was an actuary who lost his actuarial license at one point and conveniently died on us. It was very convenient. Very convenient for him. So anyway, plan sponsor was an audit. I thought it had to do with, again, employees that were excluded by name. And then, the Department of Labor thinks that the owner of the company stole money from her own plan. Why? Her and her husband, her late husband, and her late son were the predominant participants in the plan. They got the biggest part, the benefits. She had another company, and the actuary said, you know what? It's your benefit. No problem writing a check from the DB plan to this affiliated company. And I mean, the check was like for a couple $100,000. Now, as we see with Michael Cohen and checks can mean anything. So when the Department of Labor sees a check from the DB plan to another company that the woman owns, what does the Department of Labor think? Department of Labor thinks she's embezzling money. And the actuary didn't have any records showing what her benefit was, or anything saying, listen, why don't you write a check to yourself, to your company, and everything will be okay. So the Department of Labor sues her. So, a lot, the Department of Labor does sue people. They sue insolvent plan sponsors who may owe contributions. They may sue people that were absconding with money. Right now, I have to write a letter, I think this week, to a plan trustee who took over more of a benefit than she was entitled to and walked away because her ex-husband owned the company. That sort of thing. I got to deal with that kind of soap opera. But, litigation is, again, this is why I always recommend plan sponsors purchase fiduciary liability insurance in case the Department of Labor comes knocking. Department of Labor comes knocking for any reason, whether an audit or a lawsuit. Listen, this is a big thing to do, and it's a big expense to get sued. And not everybody, like, again, with my client, my opinion, she was innocent. She got bad advice. Department of Labor didn't think so. Just because you're getting sued, just because you're the scapegoat of the week with EBSA, and there's a little headline that they're suing you, doesn't mean that you're actually liable. But it does mean that you are in harm's way because the Department of Labor is coming down, breathing down your neck. Have you had any clients who get sued by the DOL or went through a really troubled DOL audit?
Not under my 316. I've had a client they were a client when I was an advisor, and now they've become a client under the 316. But they were sued by they were audited by the DOL. I want to say it just closed last summer. It was probably 3 years, Ari, it took to get everything buttoned up. Late contributions, same thing. Nothing in terms of lawsuits, though, thank God. Knock on wood.
Yeah, I mean, again, I've been through a lot of hairy situations with the Department of Labor, and when I say hairy, I mean hairy. I always talk about my biggest problem was having a DB plan with $3 million worth of assets, all with Bernie Madoff.
Yeah.
And, that plan was already under a DOL audit because they, again, participants were excluded by name, and, there wasn't entitlement to benefits, and that was a lot of fun in a perverse way, because it was a lot of fun because they don't write that stuff in the textbooks. When you're at law school and you're learning about ERISA and qualified plans and all that stuff, that kind of stuff is not in the textbooks, it's not in the code, and it was a very novel way on how we fixed it. But it was a really scary and long-term process, and that happens to plan sponsors a lot more than a class action lawsuit. So that's why it's important for plan sponsors to realize that, class action is the least of your worries. A lawsuit by a disgruntled, former employee, an IRS audit, a DOL audit, DOL lawsuit. These are bigger threats that can happen to plans of all sizes.
Yeah, Harry, you had mentioned earlier, fiduciary liability insurance. Does that cover ERISA matters?
It can cover DOL matters. I've seen it do that.
Okay.
With DOL lawsuits, legal litigation. It really depends on the coverage. I have seen that happen.
Okay.
Of course, in my situation, the DOL lawsuit, the woman didn't have fiduciary liability insurance.
Yeah.
But, you got to look to what type of policies are there and what kind of coverage, because there may be policies out there that certainly would exclude, coverage with, if you weren't complying with ERISA and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's where I was going there. We moved heaven and earth to get coverage when we launched the 316, and I mean, folks that went to Lloyd's of London to get coverage. I mean, that's how crazy it was in terms of trying to cover our liabilities. But the one thing that we went back to repeatedly was, ERISA exclusions, and the thought process was we can't indemnify something that you as a plan sponsor can purposely do.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not, putting in contributions when you're supposed to, I mean, that's not your fault. Precisely,
and that's where they were going.
If you don't want to, tell people that they're participants in the plan, even though, whatever it is, there's only so much you can do as a plan provider to get your plan sponsors to, comply. So anyway, I think that's it with this episode. This was a really fun episode. I always like talking about threats, and I always like to talk about the fact that I was right with that annoying guy on LinkedIn that, class action lawsuit is the least of a plan sponsor, whereas there's a whole host of problems out there that there are bigger issues and bigger threats to liability. So
is the grudge settled?
I think that guy's not on LinkedIn anymore. He was a weird guy. He was a weird, strange guy. He did something with brokers. Like, I don't know what type of business, but it was strange because he would, pick fights. My opinion is this. My opinion's not wrong. It's just my opinion. Your opinion is that I'm selling fear. My opinion is that I'm selling a good product to keep plan sponsors out of harm's way. Whatever,
Well, whatever that guy is, thank you for the motivation.
Exactly.
Thank you for the article.
Okay, until next week, we'll talk to you guys later. Take care. Bye.
Take care.